Well, thanks, Dr. Drost. Like he said, I work with Dr. Drost over there at the research farm. And in my presentation, I want to talk about a little bit about the plant first. It's kind of a weird plant. We're going to look at that, and then also the traditional systems that we see. And then we'll take a look at the annual system that we're working on, and then some of the data, some of the information that we've gathered from that. So here's the asparagus crown. So this is what you're going to see, what we don't see underneath the ground. And the most important parts are these three over here. We have the stems, which we're also going to call the spears or the fern later on. And then we have the buds. The buds are where those stems are going to grow from. And then our roots. And our roots are equally as important because they have all of the energy storage for the spears later on in the year. And then one of the big drivers of, I guess the main driver of growth for asparagus is temperature, and it's going to act upon these buds and cause them to grow. And we'll look at that as we go through here. So here's a look at a traditional field, what it would look like. You can see these are pretty big plants. It's a 7-year-old field. And so some of the things that we have to look at when deciding to put in one of these traditional systems is the initial investment into this crop. We're not going to get yields at the very beginning. It's going to cost some money to put these in, and then it's going to take some time before we get any of that back. And there's also a variability in the yield from year to year, and there's a lot of different things that go into that, and we'll talk about that as well. Now, this is a long-term commitment crop. Unlike a lot of our other vegetable crops, this is a long-lived perennial, and then also there's a lot of space that's needed for our asparagus. We look here at this plant right here, in between here, and then this is another row. We've got 5 feet of space here, so it usually takes a lot of space to have a traditional system. So this is a nice snapshot, I guess, of asparagus, a traditional asparagus system, kind of a life cycle, if you will, of a traditional production. So on the left side, we have the years. It takes some time, like I said, to get anything off of this crop. First, we have to prepare the field and get it going the year prior. We have to think about what we're going to do to amend the soil, do like Dr. Drost talked about before, about testing the soil, seeing what's there already, and then maybe dealing with any type of perennial weeds that exist. And then in our first year, then that's where we're going to plant. We're going to buy crowns, set up some kind of some buying from a grower for our crowns, and then we're going to put those in year one. And then we're just going to let that grow. That's going to grow up the fern. It's going to gain in those buds and in those roots. And then year two, it's going to do the same thing. We're not going to harvest, and we're going to leave that plant so it can gain more and more energy and build up into the system. But if you look on the right side here, one of the important things, there is a cost to every single year, and these costs are fixed. We have to pay this price for this. So we're putting this money into it, but we're not getting anything out yet. So if we look at year three, this is when we typically would get some yield. If you look at that black section in April, then we're getting a small yield off of that. We can't take too much because it'll take too much out of those storage roots and take too much energy. But as it grows, we get down to year 5 and 6, and we can finally get into what we call full harvest, where we can really start to get a yield off of that crop. And then once we hit year 7 into 15, that's when we have some good production. We finally get our initial cost back and start to make some money. But we do have a variability in yield, so we don't know exactly what we're going to get. And then finally, it'll be up to 20 years. This crop will be in the field. And so that's that commitment. It's a huge commitment, up to 2 decades of your property, especially if you have a small farm or limited area, then this system, it can be pretty difficult to put in. Now, this is a look at just some of the yields that are out there. It kind of shows the variability of yields depending on where you're at, what your environment is like. And so over here we have, I have Washington. In California, there's 1,500 pounds per acre difference. Utah, we can get around 4,000. We go clear to the bottom, we have Peru at 90 500, depend how old your crop is, and then also how well you manage that each and every year. And so your summer, what you do in the summer is going to determine what you get in the spring as a harvest. So you have to take care of that crop throughout. It can't be forgotten in any way. Otherwise, we're gonna get less yield. And then just give an idea of how many plants per acre. We have 8,700 to 12,000, and we'll compare that to annual asparagus, which is very high here in a minute. So that's just a little snapshot of what we see out there. Now this is what we see in annual asparagus. You can see we have the plants are really close together. And here's a picture of down on the left of our traditional asparagus, where we have the plants very far apart. And so we have 5 to 6 feet in the traditional versus we have 18 inches in the spacings in our annual asparagus. And we also want to focus on the early production of this. This is, you can kind of see in the background of the picture on the right, there's a kind of skeleton back there of our high tunnel where we can put plastic on that, close it up, and get a little bit earlier production than out in an open field. And then one of our goals is to increase the productivity. And that one of the ways we do that is by increasing the plants per square foot in here. We're putting, not only bringing the rows in together, but we're putting a lot more plants in every row. Now we want to maximize the use of our space. We want to get as much money as we can out of every square foot. So that's kind of the focuses of our system we're working on. And so where this idea came from, Dr. Drost and his colleagues were talking one time, or many times, I'm sure, about how there's a need to find alternatives to traditional systems. And here's some of the reasons. There's labor is one of the issues in all farming that exists out there. It's not that easy to get people to go out there and harvest large amounts of asparagus over these big farms. You see the picture on the right. It's not easy work. I've done it myself on our systems, and it is certainly not easy. And there's also a need to meet the needs of different markets, especially local markets. And in traditional systems, we usually see that you're kind of confined to whatever the environment's going to give you. It's going to come up usually the same time each year, and you're just going to meet that. So we want to find a way to meet an earlier market or different markets completely. And then be able to be flexible with our land use, change what we do in a shorter period of time. They want to look at that, and then also increase the productivity and maybe get rid of some of that variability that we see in a traditional system. So this is these pictures on the right. This is one of Dr. Drost's colleagues in Japan. These pictures showing some of the alternative systems that they've come up with to meet different markets. So the top picture on your right, that's a tunnel growing. This is growing field crowns out of an old field, getting one last harvest out of it by taking the crowns out of the field and putting them in these raised beds, and then warming it up and getting them to grow during the winter time, where they can get a lot of money per pound for that asparagus. And then the bottom picture, that's showing, it's more looks like traditional style, where you have the wider spacings between the rows here. You can kind of see it's pretty wide, but they've increased the amount of 2 rows instead of 1. And so they're going to heat that up and also meet an alternative market. And so these are the things that we've come up with to do in our research. On the left, we have our high tunnels. Looks very similar to our other picture, but closed up with that plastic. And you can see we put these plants kind of down in these kind of furrows, somewhat mimicking what traditional production would do. I kind of put it in and then put the plants in, let them grow, and then fill it up over the season, and to try to get the spears to be bigger when they come up. Now on the right, we have a field that's going to mimic our how many plants are out there, and to see what we can get out of that. So that's kind of what we look like over our farm. Now here are the different plants that we're using. We have, for the last 2 years, used seedlings, and these little guys, we've really focused on getting the biggest buds that we can, and the greatest amount of buds we can onto those plants, and then the biggest amount of roots. But if you look at the seedlings, there's really small roots here, are the ones that are holding all the energy. And these are little spears that had come up and ferned out. They're really small when they go in. And what we found is that they put out a little bit smaller spears than we want. We'd like to have the yield increased. And so we went to add it and kind of adapted to that need. And now we've added 1-year-old crowns and also field crowns. Now our 1-year-old crowns, see in this picture, we have good root mass. We have a lot of energy storage in here. And then we have the buds that are here at the top. And those are also larger. So we're assuming that by putting that in the ground, we can presume that we're going to get a little bit bigger plants during the year when it's gaining all that energy, and then be able to get a bigger harvest the next year. Our mature field crowns, these have come out of an old field, about 15 years old. We've pulled them out. We've taken some good pieces off and also planted those at the higher densities. And they have some really good roots on them. They have big buds. And so we want to see what those will do as well. So we have all of these in the ground that we're looking at right now. So this is a snapshot, kind of like we looked at with the traditional. This is what we're looking at with annual, really simplistic compared. And we first have to prep the field just like we would do in our traditional system. But all we have to do is plant our crowns or our seedlings, and then grow them for this first year. And then our second year, we can start in March with what we're doing. We're in these tunnels. We can start very early compared to our outdoor stuff. And we basically can shut that up and shut the tunnel up, and then we can harvest off whatever it will give us until the spears are too small. And then we can be done with that. And we can take that crop out and we can put something else in. If you want to put something in May, at least up here in Cache Valley, we can pull it out and put another crop in. If you wanted a warm season crop to put in that same space, we can do that. So really it's really flexible in that way, where you can have multiple crops that you can make a lot of money, I guess you could say, with that land without having to have that long-term commitment with the traditional. Now, this is some of the things we found with the yield. And so we have different population or different amount of plants that we're working with here. We have in our rows, we have 3-inch spacings between plants, 4 and 6. And the 3-inch spacing, we're at 116,000 plants per acre. So you can see we've increased it tremendously from traditional, which at its highest is 12,000. And so we want to see, as part of this project, is to see what will happen if we put those all close together, how the plants are going to react. In vegetable crops, if you put things too close together, usually we get a negative effect. But we've seen with asparagus, if we push these really close together, we can get a higher yield. So the blue bars here is that 160,000 plants per acre. And in both 2020 and 21, we can see that they are higher than the other population. So this is something we're seeing that is working, that we're able to take this perennial plant and use an annual system. And like I said before, we're putting we have those other crowns in the ground that are a little bit more mature, that we can hopefully get a higher yield off of it and actually increase this. So just again, to look at this, just want to show this again, because I'm going to show a graph that shows our high tunnel and compare that with our field production. So this is what we found with our yield over time. So this picture, or the left side of this graph, these solid lines, this is looking at our high tunnel production, and then kind of on the right where the dashed lines are, that's looking at the field production. And so what we're seeing here, if you look at these lines going, we have the lines where it comes way up to the top, and then it's dropping down. We have these lines, these waves are in response to temperature. And so we see that with the field, the high tunnel production, and it follows into the field. When we have a warm week, then like this one that starts in March and it goes up after we shut that tunnel, then it came way up. But one thing what we'd like to do, continue with our research, is to see if there's a way to get a little more overlap right here. This section, we have about 2 weeks where our high tunnel overlaps with the field. And we're looking at ways that we can, instead of have high production right here at the very beginning, we want to bring this line down and kind of flatten it out and move it more towards the field. And because we got to remember with asparagus, we gain all of our buds and our roots in the year prior. So when we have these really big events of high yields, and we're all of those buds are giving us spears early, and that's all we have. So we're looking at ways that we can stretch that out, but we definitely are seeing high production in here. And once again, we're seeing a lot of good yield numbers on we have the plants close, spaced close together. All right, so just to kind of wrap up, there's a lot of benefits that we're seeing in our annual asparagus. We're seeing that it's a flexible system, and we're adapting as researchers to figure out different ways that we can come up with, so you as growers can take it and adapt it to whatever system you have. And one of the things that we're excited to see is that we can get early numbers in our high tunnels. Production in there is really good quality as well. We can control the temperature a little bit better in those and keep things from freezing, and insect pressure and different things like that we're able to control a little better, so that we are getting ability to reach a little bit different markets, especially the early ones. And then one of the good things I can see is bringing diversity to your farms. Like Dr. Dross said, I worked over at the Student Organic Farm and managed it. And we had a CSA program, and we bought local asparagus from somebody up here in Cache Valley, and it added a lot of the value to it. A lot of people really enjoyed it and wanted to buy it. And it's just something that would be great in the mix. And then we're seeing that it's a great way to increase the yield of asparagus on a small piece of property. That, there's only so much space that you can give to one plant, and to be able to decrease the commitment that we have in growing the plant would be a good benefit to really any grower, I think, who's interested in this. And then using it in a rotation, if you have high tunnels, or if you have an interest in growing other crops in high tunnels, or doing it already, you could take that and add it to your mix of crops you want to grow. And then I guess one of the best things about this is that you get your money back quickly. In your traditional system, it takes quite a long time. It can take 10 to 12 years to be able to break even and start to make your money back. And then you don't have very many years after that to make your good profit. And so with this, we have kind of a high initial cost when we put it in, but we get all that money back in that first year, and get our profits off of that, all in that one single year. And so these are some of the benefits that we see, some of the things that we're seeing, and we're just kind of excited to see what the next couple of years is going to bring, as we start to see with the yield from these other crowns, and hopefully they'll be bringing it up more, and we can report more later on that. And so thank you. Thanks for listening, and I guess we'll go to any questions.
Okay, a couple things that thanks a lot, Josh, for providing us with that information. There's an evaluation that pops up for each one of the speakers. We would really, really like our participants to kind of put their 2 cents worth into that evaluation. So please do that. I've got a couple questions for you, Josh, that have come from our audience. Shoshana says, can you briefly mention why you chose to talk about annual versus perennial, and what are those brief differences between that? I think that people are kind of confused by the perennial term. I think that's what it is. And then what do you mean by traditional?
Okay. Yeah, so your perennial versus your annual. So generally with your perennial crop, you're going to be growing it for multiple years. It's going to be your system, like with your perennial asparagus, then it's going to be the same plant that's going to be producing over and over from year to year. More than 1 year is usually how it's put. And so our annual, growing as an annual just means that we're going to use it for basically one growth cycle, and then we're going to pull it out. It's more similar, you think of tomatoes, where you're going to put it, tomato would usually be put in the springtime sometime, then it would be done by the fall, and you'd have to put a new plant in the next year, versus our perennial, it's going to be put in the spring, and we can harvest, then we can harvest that year, maybe the next year, and the next year, just keep going with that cycle. And then,
Okay. Yeah, so then the other one was, when you say traditional, what do you really mean by that?
yeah, so our traditional system, I apologize for not mentioning what that is. That's referring to what is traditionally done, usually in America. That's what is done usually in our temperate climates. That's something that's been done for a very long time, is that system. So it's just kind of the normal system that we're looking at versus our annual, which it's very different than the perennial and annual. That's kind of they kind of match each other that way.
Okay, and then June asked, can you use an annual, it says, is annual asparagus available for purchase by home gardeners and home growers? And I think what she really means is, how could I do this, And so, maybe talk a little bit about the transplant versus crown thing.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that you can do. Because it's not select just for just a big grow or anything like that. But one of the things that you can do, so we grow our own transplants, our little seedlings in a greenhouse here. If you're not able to do that and plant your own out, you can purchase the crowns. So we purchase our crowns, the 1-year-old crowns. And so that is something you can do. At the store, they have the crowns you can put in the ground. You can buy those and grow it just the exact same way. That makes sense.
Okay, we have another question that says they probably missed something on that one graph. Was there units on that yield graph, and what were they?
Oh, so the units. So the units that we use on there is grams, but you gotta. They seem very small, which obviously a gram is, but we're using it in very small plots. So when I showed the picture of the tunnels, then that's where that data was coming from, was in one of those research tunnels. And so these are very small areas that we're taking off of. And so, yeah, it's in grams, but we're saying that we're getting a good yield basically per square foot inside of these small plots. That's what's on your graph. So.
And then another question from Sherilyn was, what do you do with the crowns when you're done with them?
That's a good question. So when we're done with the crowns, and we simply take them out and we get rid of them. And that's because we've taken so much out of them by just cutting off every spear that is marketable, that there's really not much left inside of the root ball itself. We've actually pulled those out each year for the last 2 years. We've dug up sections out of our tunnels and out of the field and looked at those crowns and weighed them and to see what was left of them. And so they're really depleted. And if they were to be left in the ground, then they really wouldn't give you any production. The life of them would go way down if you try to keep growing them from year to year. So at that point, they're really no good. They're just taken out.
Okay, and then I think the last one last question that we had here is, I think that, I think you kind of answered it, but Al asked the question, after you're harvesting the annual crop, how do you store the crowns so that they can be replanted? And just make sure that you reiterate that that's not the goal here.
Yeah. In order, so in a regular system, your traditional system, it would never be removed. And so you would leave it there to grow. If you move it, then you take the life out of it that way too. So yeah, we don't want to reuse those at all. We wouldn't pull them out and put them somewhere else or pot them up or anything like that. We definitely just take them out and have to replace them with new crowns the following season.
Yeah, so, well, that's really good. Thanks for doing that. So, essentially, yeah, people, when we're dealing with annual, there's a few more questions here that kind of relate to that. We're not trying to grow this plant like a tree where it's going to be there year after year after year. You may find that you have other options on your farm that space is too valuable for. You're, finding that, oh, it's more lucrative to grow crop X, Y, or Z. So, this system allows you to kind of come and go as you see fit. And so we're not going to store them. We're going to buy them. We can compost them afterwards. You can use the resources that are still stored there. And essentially, we're just going to treat it very, very different than what we historically do. And so it's a real weird concept to get your head around, but some of our early results suggest that it's going to be, it's really, really lucrative as well.